Dear friends, it is an honor to participate today, albeit remotely, in this memorial, including in the presence of so many high-level dignitaries. Your presence speaks to the legacy and inspiration of the late Mrs. Ogata, who, even to this day, maintains a remarkable convening power. Mrs. Ogata needs no introduction, so I will only share a couple of brief reflections about her, my predecessor as United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, whom I also have the honor of calling, with undiminished gratitude and emotion, my mentor and my personal friend. Mrs. Ogata was unflappable in any situation. She was as comfortable and effective speaking to the UN Security Council as she was with world leaders, rebel fighters, in academic halls, or on the floor of a refugee shelter, listening to stories of heartbreak, grief, flight, displacement. She rarely flinched in a crisis, even when she was in the midst of active conflict, as she did so often in the Balkans, or the Great Lakes of Africa, and in many other places. Her calm and composure were legendary to us, especially to us, the younger colleagues. Whenever she was congratulated for a job well done by UNHCR, she would almost invariably respond, "Well, this is our job." Mrs. Ogata would have, however, not accepted so calmly the direction the world has taken in the past years. She would have been frustrated with the lack of international cooperation, including the Security Council's inability to work together on today's biggest challenges: conflict, climate, food insecurity, or even find consensus to alleviate humanitarian suffering. And she would have been aghast at the "me first," "my country first" rhetoric, or the duplicitous representation by some politicians of refugees as abusers and threats, instead of explaining that they're just people, like you and me, but unjustly forced to flee their homes due to conflict or persecution. And while frustrated at the state of the world, she would not have been deterred by its difficulties and would never, never have given up on refugees or other vulnerable people. Instead, she would have pushed, even against the strongest of tides, for greater cooperation to tackle the global character of the challenges we face today, like the climate emergency, poverty, or a pandemic, because she recognized that challenges like these can only be met with collective responses. She would have also pressed for others to do more, to step in to find solutions. For, like she said many times, there are no humanitarian solutions to political crisis. She was a pioneer in encouraging development actors to engage early in humanitarian crisis, as well as pushing for greater involvement of others, arguing that political, human rights, humanitarian, and development must all work closely together for those crises to be addressed in an effective and sustainable manner. This is the crux of the human security approach that she championed decades ago. Like in so many aspects of her life, Mrs. Ogata was well ahead of her time on this as well. 20 years later, and the world is finally beginning to translate her vision into action. This has been particularly evident in the affirmation by the United Nations General Assembly of the Global Compact on Refugees in 2018, which called for a new approach to displacement involving a whole-of-society approach, bringing together governments with humanitarian and development actors, the private sector, academics, sport institutions, religious leaders, and many others to respond more holistically to the complex challenges of today. It is encouraging that JICA and the government of Japan have adopted much of Mrs. Ogata's vision into their actions. We see this in your commitment to multilateralism, which I'm certain will be exemplified fully during your tenure on the Security Council, and in your support to solutions and consensus building. We also see it in your long-standing and steadfast support of refugees and UNHCR, including with the government of Japan agreeing to co-convene the Global Refugee Forum, the second one, next December. For this and so much more, I'm grateful, and I am certain that Mrs. Ogata would be too. As I close, I hope you will permit me to share a personal anecdote, which some of you may have heard before. Mrs. Ogata was always a global, internationalist supporter of multilateral solutions. But she was profoundly attached to her country and proud to be Japanese. At the end of my first visit to Japan with her, it was after TICAD II in 1998, almost 25 years ago, she asked about my impressions. She said, "Did you start to understand how geography and history made us, Japan, into a lonely country? We," she added, "can only thrive if we play an international role in making peace, and in so doing support stronger humanitarian and development responses." It was the High Commissioner for Refugees speaking there, for sure, but also the young girl who had been exposed to political turbulence in the 30s, and then the terrible catastrophe of World War II, and the keen observer of contemporary history and international relations through years of international academic work. That was what she wanted for Japan, most certainly, but also for the entire world. And it is something that she would continue to press for, even, or rather especially, in these very challenging times. And in so doing, she would demand that we all remain resolute in our protection of and support to the world's most vulnerable, including refugees and the displaced people. Thank you.